Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A very tragic thing occurred for those of us that care about constitutional rights. Occurred yesterday. It is a continuation of the travesty that is coming out of the so-called special counsel, Robert Mueller. I'm not aware of anybody else in the House or Senate that was as absolutely concerned and livid when I heard about the appointment of Robert Mueller as a special counsel, because from my questioning of the man and from my research, from questioning the man during judiciary hearings, I believe he has done more damage to the FBI than all of the FBI directors put together since J. Edgar Hoover. He ran off thousands and thousands of years of experience from the FBI and his goofy 5-year up or out policy. It works in some areas, but not in law enforcement. That's the one area where law enforcement need time to build credibility with local law enforcement. But anyway, these guys were, most of them that he ran off with thousands and thousands of years of experience during his first 10 years, which is the requisite term set up for an FBI director. Those guys were trained to recognize radical Islamist characteristics as to what they were studying, what they believed, things they did. And that was a very helpful thing for the FBI to know. They began, I guess about at least really got on track after the attempted, well, actually the bombing of the World Trade Center in 1993. And it was incredible the amount of information the FBI had discerned about radical Islam during the prosecution of the Blind Sheikh, led by Andrew McCarthy, brilliant lawyer. He was a fantastic prosecutor. I believe Mr. McCarthy said yesterday in an interview that he had 3 prosecutors helping him with what at that time was the most important and high-level prosecution of radical Islamist terrorism in our country. Since then, back in 2008, there was prosecution and conviction of principals involved in the Holy Land Foundation that were convicted for supporting terrorism. The FBI gathered that evidence as well. Yet under Robert Mueller, who came in immediately before 9/11, you would have thought that this man would have enough wisdom after seeing the tragedy befall thousands of Americans. Now, what does he do? He crawls in bed with CARE, one of the named co-conspirators in the Holy Land Foundation trial, along with others, and wants to placate them at all costs. They wanted his training materials that helped FBI agents understand what to look for in trying to find a radical Islamist terrorist. They wanted those materials purged, cleaned out of anything that might help educate our FBI agents as to what to look for in radical Islamists. And FBI Director Robert Mueller obliged. And there was nothing that I think draws the distinction about how wrong-headed he was as FBI director than his responses when I was asking him about the heads up that they had gotten over the Sarniev older brother, who was the main Boston bomber. killed and maimed so many people, totally preventable if we had allowed his agents to know what to look for. But in frustration, I had said, you didn't even go out to the mosque to find out if they had been radicalized. You didn't go out there to find out about the Tsarnaevs at the mosques where they worship. He said they did go out to those mosques in their outreach program. It's where they go, play patty cake, sit around, maybe have a meal together on the floor, something like that. And that's great. That's fine to do. It's a good thing to do. But not when you're ignoring your law enforcement function that will prevent so many people in Boston from having their lives tragically ended or tragically altered and a living hell imposed upon them. But that was our Robert Mueller. You go back to his days as the acting U.S. attorney in Boston, when even after it was clear to most everybody else that the FBI had helped frame Whitey Bulger, the mob boss's competitors, and put 4 in prison, it was clear to most everybody at that point the FBI framed these guys. They didn't do it. And yet Mueller was still writing the parole board demanding that they not let them out on parole, which ended up costing the people of Boston and Massachusetts over $100 million for Mueller's horrible aid. The taxpayers of the United States paid less of a price for the years of harassment that Robert Mueller, with his kick, James Comey, zeroing in on Dr. Hatfield as the person who was spreading bioterror. I think they only paid about $6 million as a result of Mueller's intensity on pursuing the wrong guy against whom there was not one shred of any evidence that could ever be used. The only thing they had to justify the many years of torture that the FBI put Dr. Hatfield through was when 2 dogs, which were later found to have been totally bogus in spotting anything, when they went by Dr. Hatfield, he rubbed their ears, and they seemed to have reacted favorably to having their ears rubbed. That was the only so-called evidence Bob Mueller ever had, and he was relentless. And one thing you got to give Robert Mueller credit for, he's consistent. He has destroyed so many lives. He's cost people their lives, but he never apologizes. He always hides behind the words that he's doing his job when he goes about destroying innocent people's lives. Alan Dershowitz, I've disagreed with him so many times on policy matters, but he understands the Constitution. So does Jonathan Turley. As Dershowitz said, he didn't vote for Donald Trump, but he sees what is happening. And he points out in an article published today in he says, so much speculation as to the significance of the search of the offices and hotel room of President Trump's lawyer, Michael Cohen. To obtain a search warrant, prosecutors must demonstrate to a judge that they have probable cause to believe the premises to be searched contain evidence of crime. They must also specify the area to be searched, the items to be seized, and in searches of computers, the word searches to be used. The problem is there has to be probable cause established by sworn evidence to justify a warrant. And when anyone gets a warrant to go after a lawyer of someone that law enforcement wants to target, the way Mueller and Rosenstein want to target Donald Trump, there's got to be probable cause put in the affidavits. Now, these guys have gotten so used to sending out bogus national security letters like subpoenas. We found out that while Mueller was at the FBI, the IG says there may have been thousands of letters sent out with no basis in fact. This was under under his direction at the FBI. He may not have known individual letters, but he let things get out of control. Because in his mind, when he or any of the people working for him are going after people they think are bad guys, it doesn't matter what they do. They're in the right. And that's exactly how you can lose a constitutional republic that we have. Dershowitz says, I believe we would have been hearing more from civil libertarians, the American Civil Liberties Union, attorneys groups, and privacy advocates if the raid had been on Hillary Clinton's lawyer. Many civil libertarians have remained silent about potential violations of President Trump's rights because they strongly disapprove of him and his policies. That's a serious mistake because those violations establish precedents that lie around like loaded guns capable of being aimed at other targets. What else does the raid tell us? He says it seems likely that Special Counsel Robert Mueller is bifurcating his investigation. He'll keep control of matters relating to Russia, the campaign, and possible obstruction, but he's handed over to the U.S. Attorney for Southern District of New York any matters relating to Trump's personal and business affairs. Well, I would submit to you, having been a prosecutor, defense attorney, felony judge, chief justice, that normally when somebody in law enforcement raids a lawyer's office, and in this case, office, home, and since they were out of the home while it was being apparently remodeled, they raided the hotel room. When a raid on a lawyer's office, and especially personal areas, occurs, the guys raiding that are lawyers know if they find something, even if it's a potential defendant telling his lawyer, I am guilty of sin, and we know that didn't happen in this case because President Trump knows he's not guilty, but even hypothetically, if the target had said that to his lawyer, judges ultimately, even if it has to go to the Supreme Court, that is not going to be admissible. That's going to be protected by attorney-clients. That's why every defendant that people suspect told his lawyer exactly what he did doesn't have that lawyer's office raided, because if this system of justice is going to work, there has to be two adversarial sides that do the very best they can as long as it's ethical and it's constitutional, following the law. So the attorney-client relationship means something. It's protected. Courts have made that clear. Doesn't matter what you got that went between the attorney and client. Now, there are those that say, well, but, you know, the law, if they're both engaged in fraud, then together, well, you still got an attorney-client problem with admissibility. And that's why normally when someone in law enforcement raids a lawyer's office trying to target their client, they're looking for something that they can use against that lawyer. Hopefully, maybe a bunch of violations, no matter what it is, they can use against that lawyer that doesn't have an arguably protected status of attorney-client, just something to do with the lawyer, so that they can tell that lawyer, here's what we've got now. We had what we believe was a lawful search, and while we were searching, we found all this stuff that shows you've committed other crimes. So you're looking at going for life or 1,000 years, whatever it is they happen to use in that particular case. However, if you will simply testify that your client violated the law, you don't go to prison at all, you stay rich, everything looks good for you. It's only your client that suffers. Well, in this case, it would be a constitutional republic going down the toilet. Mueller doesn't care. He's shown that over and over. He let Eric Holder get away with all kinds of things. Some would say even murder in the Fast and Furious operation where one of our own agents died. Potentially hundreds of others across the border died as a result of Eric Holder's department's actions. But they covered up. They obfuscated how they had violated the law that resulted in death. Eric Holder said something recently in the press about he knows Mueller, and Mueller's going to get Trump on something. Well, there is a reason President Obama extended the horrendous 10 years that Mueller was FBI director for 2 extra years. And any of my colleagues that really want to go back and see who Mueller is and what he did, I can show you. There is plenty to show the damage that this man has done to our country. Served valiantly in Vietnam, great, congratulations, you deserve awards, but that doesn't give you a right to ruin my country after you get back. And that's what he has been doing, and he is bringing us to the brink of a terrible constitutional crisis. And I think he's also trying to provoke the president to firing Mueller, because Mueller knows he doesn't have anything right now. This is a last-ditch effort to try to find something, try to get something, get somebody to testify against the president, even if it's a lie, just as it was that put Sergeant Derek Miller in prison for life, whose parole hearing I came back and testified before last week. It's not that hard to get people to testify to a lie against somebody else when you're threatening to take everything they care about away. Rosenstein needs to be stopped. He was involved in the original Russia uranium investigation as a U.S. attorney. He should never have been allowed to appoint a special counsel if he had any decency and ethics about himself. Rosenstein, he should have told Jeff Sessions, I'm not the guy that can do this because I was involved in that Russia uranium investigation that enriched Hillary Clinton's foundation, $145 million. I can't do this. But since he's not ethical, he's not moral, and he doesn't mind keeping the limitations running while they're looking elsewhere rather than at him and Mueller, who was also the FBI director involved in that Russia investigation where Russia was trying to get our uranium. Neither one of them should have been able to accept. Rosenstein has got to go. And his assistant that so often keeps the good people that supported President Trump in the dark, Tosh Gahar, she needs to go. She needs to go. And Rosenstein, follow him right out the door. Those people are doing more damage over there. They got to go. And then we can try to salvage this country and our constitutional republic. And by the way, tomorrow we're voting on a balanced budget amendment. I came up here wanting a balanced budget amendment in Congress, wanting it passed here in the Senate and across the nation. But I saw very quickly how easy it was to raise revenue, taxes, fees, whatever you want to call it. And if we don't have a spending cap on a balanced budget amendment, it is a prescription for ratcheting up the level of spending, taxing, because we just can't get people to vote for real cuts. We vote to slow the rate of spending sometime, but real cuts, we couldn't even vote to do that. We had the horrendous thing called the sequestration that gutted our military, which we've been trying to make up for, but every time we had hundreds of billions of dollars just to do what's right by the military. And now to Pelosi big smiles because all that they were awarded during that horrendous vote is a huge mistake. And I guess it's a cover our rear type action, but it doesn't cover anything. It's like a hospital gown. You only think you're covered. This doesn't cover anything. Bob Goodlatte has a good balanced budget amendment that includes a spending cap, but that's not the one we're going to be allowed to vote on. And we're not even going to be allowed to bring an amendment to put a spending cap on this bill. That's why I voted against it last time. And people say, oh, but you don't have to worry. There's protection in this against things like that terrible omnibus. Oh, what's the protection? Oh, if you look, and I did, it says that we'll require 3/5 of a vote from the House and Senate to, set aside the requirements of the balanced budget amendment and to raise revenue. So to raise revenue, we got to have 60% vote. And in that horrendous omnibus, it was 60.5% of the vote. This terrible balanced budget amendment we're voting on is such a farce. It would not have even stopped us from hurting future generations in this last omnibus bill. It still would have passed even if the balanced budget amendment we're voting on tomorrow were a part of the Constitution already. And then you say it won't take effect for 5 years? Please. Senate's not going to take it up. This is to try to make us look conservative after the omnibus bill. And I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker, I want a balanced budget amendment that means something, not a hospital gown bill. I yield back.